Charles Leclerc might be in real trouble at his own team, and I do not say that lightly. Lewis Hamilton just won his first race in red, and the timing could not be worse for the driver who has spent the last several years being the undisputed face of Ferrari's Formula One project. Two retirements in a row, a power steering failure that ended his Barcelona weekend before it really got going, and a seven-time world champion suddenly delivering exactly the kind of result everyone in Maranello has been waiting for since the day he signed. By the time this video ends, you are going to know exactly what Ferrari's leadership is actually saying behind closed doors about Leclerc's future, why one specific family name inside the company is refusing to panic, and what almost nobody outside the paddock has noticed about the numbers behind this entire storyline. But here's the question nobody at Ferrari wants to answer out loud right now. Is this just a rough patch, or is it the start of something far bigger for Charles Leclerc? Stick around, because the answer is more complicated than either side of the internet wants it to be, and there was one detail about who actually spoke up for Leclerc this week that almost nobody is talking about yet, even though it might be the single most telling part of this whole story. It is not a teammate, it is not a race engineer, and it is not even the team principal. It is a surname that has been attached to this company before most of the current grid was even born, and once you hear exactly what that person said, you'll probably understand why people inside the paddock take it so seriously. We'll get there, but first you actually need to understand exactly how bad this weekend really was for Leclerc, because the full picture is honestly worse than most headlines let on. Let's start where it actually happened, on track, in Spain, at the Barcelona-Catalunya circuit, a place that has quietly become one of the most revealing venues on the entire calendar for exposing who really has the upper hand inside a team. According to reports from the weekend, Leclerc looked sharp from the very first practice session. He was fast, he was confident, and by qualifying, he genuinely looked like a driver on course for pole position, the kind of lap that makes a commentator sit up a little straighter. Then it fell apart, not because of bad luck in the traditional sense, not because of a crash, not because of someone else's mistake, but because of an error and a mechanical issue that together turned a promising weekend into what Leclerc himself reportedly described as a nightmare. A power steering failure ended his race early, and if you've ever wondered what it looks like when a driver's shoulders visibly drop on a pit wall monitor, that was apparently the moment. For anyone who is not deep into the technical side of the sport, it's worth pausing here for a second, because a power steering failure is not some minor inconvenience like a flickering dashboard light. These cars generate enormous cornering forces, and without that assisted steering system working properly, a driver is suddenly fighting the wheel with raw arm strength through every single corner, lap after lap, at speeds where a half-second of hesitation can be the difference between a clean lap and a spin into the gravel. It's physically exhausting, it's mentally distracting, and it's exactly the kind of issue that turns a car capable of fighting for pole position into a car that simply cannot be pushed safely anymore. That's the reality Leclerc was reportedly dealing with before the team made the call to retire the car rather than risk a bigger incident. Meanwhile, on the other side of the same garage, wearing the same overalls, driving a car built by the same engineers, Lewis Hamilton was doing something he had never done before in his career, winning a Grand Prix for Ferrari. Let that sink in for a second, because it's honestly a strange sentence to type out. A driver with 7 world championships, more race wins than anyone in the sport's history, finally getting his first Ferrari victory, and getting it in the exact same race weekend where his teammates' championship hopes took another hit. You couldn't write a more dramatic split screen if you tried, and the timing alone is why this story is spreading the way it is. Now, here's something a lot of casual viewers might be missing, because the headlines only tell you half the picture. This was not Hamilton's first big moment in red this season. According to the numbers from this campaign, Barcelona marked his 3rd podium finish for Ferrari, meaning this was not some shocking one-off fluke result that came out of nowhere. It was the continuation of a trend that had already been building for weeks. Hamilton started the year adjusting to a new car, a new team, new engineers, and frankly, a completely different way of working than he was used to after over a decade at his previous outfit. Anyone who tells you that kind of transition is simple has clearly never actually switched jobs, let alone switched teams in the most technically demanding sport on the planet. Every team has its own internal language, its own way of setting up a car, its own simulator quirks, its own engineering philosophy that a driver has to absorb, almost like learning a new dialect, and doing that in front of the most demanding fan base in the entire sport, under the kind of Italian media spotlight that treats every single practice session like a referendum on the driver's entire career, is genuinely a different level of pressure compared to a normal team switch. in a car that by most public accounts took the better part of the opening months of the season to fully suit his driving style, and it becomes a lot easier to understand why the early part of his year looked rocky from the outside. But slowly, race by race, the seven-time champion appears to have found his footing, and Barcelona was the moment all of that adjustment turned into a tangible result on the actual scoreboard. For Leclerc, the timing of that breakthrough victory landing in the exact same weekend as his own mechanical failure is the kind of coincidence that, fair or not, instantly reshapes the narrative around him. And let's be honest about something here, because I think it deserves to be said plainly. Formula One fans and Formula One media can be brutally quick to pivot. One bad weekend paired with a teammate's good weekend, and suddenly think pieces start appearing questioning a driver's long-term place in the team, even a driver who has been there for years and delivered consistently strong results across that entire stretch. It is a little bit unfair if you stop and actually look at the full picture rather than just the headline from one single race, but it is also just how this sport and frankly most professional sports tend to operate. Short memories, instant narratives, and a constant hunger for the next storyline. So with that backdrop already simmering, all eyes turned toward Maranello to see how the team itself would respond to the obvious tension building between its two drivers. Online, the reaction split almost instantly into two very loud, very confident camps. And honestly, watching that split happen in real time is its own little case study in how this sport's fan base operates. One side immediately started treating Hamilton's win as undeniable proof that the balance of power inside the team had already shifted for good, posting comparison graphics, highlight reels, and confident predictions about where the championship fight was heading next. The other side pushed back just as hard, pointing out correctly that a single retirement caused by a mechanical failure says absolutely nothing about a driver's underlying speed or long-term value to a team, and that judging an entire season off one disrupted weekend is exactly the kind of overreaction this sport's online discourse tends to specialize in. Somewhere in the middle of all that noise, away from the louder voices, were Leclerc supporters who admitted the weekend stung, but were not remotely ready to write off a driver who has spent years proving himself against the best teammates Ferrari could put next to him. It is a genuinely fascinating split to watch unfold, because both camps are technically working from the same set of facts. They are just choosing to weigh those facts in completely different ways, which honestly tells you more about human psychology and fan loyalty than it does about anything happening on the actual racetrack. Would Ferrari's leadership stay quiet and let the noise pass on its own, or would somebody step forward to actually address it directly? As it turns out, somebody did step forward, and it was not just anybody inside the organization. It was someone whose surname alone carries more weight at that company than almost any title or job description ever could. That brings us to the man at the center of this story's second half, Piero Ferrari, the vice chairman of the team, and, perhaps more importantly for context, the son of the company's founder, Enzo Ferrari. When a Ferrari with that actual surname speaks publicly about a driver, people inside the sport tend to listen a little more closely than usual, because it is not just a corporate statement coming from a press office, it's coming from a family lineage that has been attached to this team since the very beginning. Speaking to the Italian publication Quotidiano Nazionale, Ferrari reportedly addressed the situation directly rather than dodging it, which honestly is not always how these things go in a sport where diplomatic non-answers are practically an art form. According to that report, Ferrari said that everyone goes through a rough patch sometimes, and added that he has no doubt about Leclerc's qualities, noting that the driver has given the team so much already and will give them so much more going forward. It is a short statement on paper, but the subtext underneath it is doing a lot of heavy lifting, because it is essentially a public vote of confidence delivered at the exact moment some fans were starting to wonder if that confidence even still existed. He didn't stop there either. Ferrari reportedly went on to explain the Barcelona weekend specifically, pointing out that it had been disrupted by a single mistake while Leclerc was genuinely on course for pole position, and stating plainly that he believes the driver will recover.
Now, is this just standard team politics, the kind of supportive public statement that every organization makes about every player or driver going through a difficult stretch? Maybe, partly. I'm not going to pretend that team executives never say comforting things publicly while privately having very different conversations behind closed doors. That happens in every sport, in every industry. But there's a difference between a generic statement from a press release and a specific, detailed defense from someone with the literal Ferrari surname, someone who has watched this team operate since long before most of its current drivers were even born. That distinction matters here, and it's worth sitting with for a moment before we move on to what might be the most interesting part of this entire story, because here's where the numbers actually back up what Piero Ferrari is claiming, and this is the part that I think gets buried under all the dramatic headlines about rough patches and nightmare weekends. Since joining Ferrari back in 2019, Leclerc has
consistently matched or outperformed every teammate placed alongside him, and that list includes a four-time world champion in Sebastian Vettel, which is not exactly a low bar to clear. Beating a four-time champion in equal machinery over a sustained period is not luck, it is not a fluke, it is a genuine marker of speed and consistency that tends to get conveniently forgotten the moment a single bad weekend happens. In fact, looking back across his entire tenure at the team, there has only been one season where Leclerc actually finished behind a teammate in the final standings, and that came in 2021, when Carlos Sainz edged him out over the full campaign. One season out of several against multiple different teammates with very different driving styles and strengths. That is the actual track record sitting underneath all of this current noise, and it is exactly the kind of context that gets lost when a single dramatic weekend dominates the conversation online. And it is worth remembering that this is not the first time Leclerc has had to dig himself out of a difficult stretch. Across his time at Ferrari, he has weathered strategy errors that cost him race wins, mechanical failures that ended promising weekends early, and entire seasons where the car simply wasn't competitive enough to fight at the front no matter how well he drove it. Each time, by most accounts from people who have worked closely with him, he has responded the same way, by going back to the simulator, going back to the data, and coming out the other side just as fast, if not faster. That pattern matters here because it is exactly the kind of resilience Piero Ferrari appears to be referencing when he says he is not worried about how Leclerc will handle a strong teammate. It is not blind optimism from a team executive trying to keep the peace. It is a pattern repeated often enough across several seasons that it has effectively become part of the driver's professional reputation inside the paddock. So why does this particular moment feel different to so many people watching from the outside? I think it comes down to one simple factor, and it is not really about Leclerc's ability at all. It's about who exactly is sitting in the other side of the garage this time around. Vettel, for all his championships, was already past his absolute peak by the time he arrived at Ferrari. Sainz was a strong, respected, genuinely underrated driver, but he did not carry the same aura, the same decades-long resume, or the same level of pure global attention that follows Lewis Hamilton wherever he goes. Hamilton is, by almost any reasonable measure, one of the greatest drivers this sport has ever produced, and his arrival at Ferrari was treated less like a normal driver transfer and more like an actual seismic event across the entire sport. When someone with that level of history and that level of expectation starts winning races almost immediately, even a driver with Leclerc's genuinely strong track record is going to face questions that his previous teammates simply never generated in quite the same way or at quite the same volume. It also helps to step back and remember that this is not exactly new territory for this particular team. Ferrari has a long, well-documented history of pairing two genuinely elite drivers together and then watching the internal dynamic become a storyline of its own, sometimes producing incredible racing and sometimes producing tension that spilled out into public view in ways the team would probably rather forget. That history is not really the point here, and I'm not going to pretend every past example ended smoothly, because plenty did not. The point is simply that this team has decades of experience managing exactly this kind of internal pressure, for better and occasionally for worse, and that experience is presumably part of why Ferrari's current leadership chose to address this situation publicly and quickly, rather than letting speculation build for weeks before saying anything at all. And that's honestly the real tension at the heart of this entire story. Not whether Leclerc is good enough, the numbers already settled that argument a while ago, but whether he can handle the unique psychological weight of sharing a garage with arguably the most accomplished driver in the sport's entire history. Piero Ferrari clearly believes he can. According to his comments, he stated plainly that he knows Leclerc, and that Leclerc is not the type of driver to struggle simply because he has a very strong teammate sitting across the garage from him. He even gave Hamilton genuine credit in the same breath, reportedly calling him a role model for everyone in the sport, before immediately circling back to express his belief that Leclerc will also record a victory of his own soon enough. That balance, praising one driver while defending the other in the very same statement, is honestly a pretty skillful piece of internal diplomacy, whether it was calculated that way or simply came out naturally in conversation. It's also worth noting how rare it actually is for a senior figure at any major sports organization to publicly praise a newer arrival while simultaneously reassuring an existing star in the same breath, without it coming across as forced or scripted. That kind of balancing act usually only works when the person saying it genuinely believes both halves of the statement, rather than just trying to keep two egos calm during a tense stretch of the season. Now let's talk about what actually happens from here, because this is where my own honest opinion comes into the picture, and I will say up front that I do not think this is anywhere near as dramatic as some corners of social media are currently making it out to be. Leclerc is 28 years old right now, which in modern Formula One terms is generally considered to be right in the middle of a driver's genuine prime years, not somewhere near the end of it. He has years of competitive racing still ahead of him, a proven track record against multiple different caliber teammates, and now, on top of all that, public backing from one of the most senior and symbolically important figures inside the entire organization. None of that disappears because of one mechanical failure in one race weekend, however painful that particular weekend genuinely was for him personally and professionally. If anything, and this part genuinely surprised me a little when I started digging into the full context here, the presence of a driver like Hamilton in the same garage might end up being exactly the kind of push that gets the absolute best out of Leclerc over the remainder of this season and beyond, rather than the thing that quietly derails him. Internal competition, when it is handled well by both the team and the individual drivers involved, has produced some of the most genuinely thrilling and competitive seasons in this sport's long history, and there is no obvious reason to assume this particular pairing has to end any differently. Of course, none of this is officially confirmed as a certainty, and I want to be careful here not to overstate things one way or the other, because nobody, myself included, can predict exactly how a Formula One season is going to unfold from one single data point in late spring. Ferrari's competitiveness as a constructor appears to be genuinely improving as the season progresses, and with both of these drivers fully capable of fighting for race victories on a given weekend, the team's own internal leadership seems confident that it is simply a matter of time before Leclerc gets his own redemption moment on track, the kind of result that flips this entire storyline right back around in the other direction. Whether that happens at the very next race or several races down the line is genuinely impossible to say with any real certainty right now. And honestly, that uncertainty is exactly what makes the rest of this season worth actually watching closely, rather than just skimming the headlines. So what would an actual bounce back even look like in practical terms? It is probably not going to be some single magical race where everything suddenly clicks and the entire narrative flips overnight, even though that is exactly the kind of clean storyline a lot of headlines will be hunting for the moment it happens. More realistically, based on how this team and this driver have operated in past difficult stretches, it likely looks like a string of clean, mistake-free weekends, the car staying reliable through full race distances, and Leclerc slowly rebuilding momentum lap by lap, rather than chasing one dramatic redemption moment. Ferrari's engineers will also have their own job to do here, because part of what made Barcelona sting so much is that the mechanical failure took a potential pole position result completely off the table before Leclerc even had the chance to fight for it on merit. If the team can tighten up reliability over the coming races, a lot of this current tension may simply resolve itself naturally, without needing a single dramatic headline moment at all. That is honestly the less exciting answer compared to what some channels will probably promise you, but it also happens to be the more accurate one based on how these situations have typically played out across this team's recent history. What I find genuinely fascinating about this entire situation, stepping back from the individual results for a moment, is what it actually reveals about how a legacy team like Ferrari manages internal pressure during a difficult stretch.
A lot of organizations, in sports and frankly in plenty of other industries too, tend to go quiet during moments like this, letting speculation fill the silence because nobody wants to say the wrong thing publicly. Ferrari, through Piero Ferrari specifically, appears to have chosen the opposite approach here, addressing the situation directly, defending their driver by name, and doing it through a respected national publication rather than some vague and forgettable social media statement. That is a deliberate choice, not an accident, and it tells you something meaningful about how seriously this particular team is treating the internal dynamic between these two title-caliber drivers right now. So where does that actually leave us as this story continues to develop in the weeks ahead? Leclerc heads into the next stretch of races carrying the heaviest external pressure of his entire Ferrari career so far, but also carrying genuine public support from deep inside the team's own leadership structure, support that comes with real history and real credibility behind it. Hamilton, for his part, has clearly found real momentum after what was admittedly a rocky start to his time at Ferrari, and he is showing absolutely no signs of slowing that momentum down anytime soon. Two genuinely elite drivers, one single team, and a championship picture that is honestly far from settled at this particular stage of the season. My honest, completely unbiased take on all of this, for whatever it happens to be worth, is that this rivalry, if you even want to fully call it that yet, is going to end up being one of the most genuinely compelling storylines in the entire sport over the back half of this season, regardless of which driver ultimately comes out ahead in the final standings. The only thing we can say with real confidence right now, the only thing that is not officially confirmed but feels close to certain based on everything we just walked through, is that Charles Leclerc is not going anywhere, and according to the people who actually know him best inside that team, he's not even close to being finished proving exactly what he can do behind that red car. If you actually think about it for a second, this entire story is a pretty good reminder of why Formula One has become must-watch television for so many people who don't even consider themselves traditional motorsport fans. It's not really about engines or downforce or tire compounds at the end of the day, even though that technical layer is genuinely fascinating in its own right. It's about two extremely talented, extremely driven human beings sharing one garage, one set of resources, and one shared goal, while quietly competing against each other every single time the lights go out. That's a uniquely difficult psychological situation that very few professions on Earth actually replicate in quite the same way. And watching how different drivers handle that pressure, some thriving under it, some genuinely struggling, is honestly one of the most compelling parts of following this sport closely over a full season, rather than just catching the occasional headline. So here's where I'll leave it, and I would genuinely love to know where you land. Do you think Leclerc bounces back within the next few races, and this entire storyline quietly fades into the background the way these things often do? Or do you think Hamilton's arrival has permanently shifted the balance of power inside that garage for good? Drop your honest take down in the comments because I read through pretty much all of them, and this is exactly the kind of debate where I genuinely don't think there's one obviously correct answer right now. Either way, this is a story we'll absolutely be coming back to as the season progresses, because right now, with both of these drivers fully capable of winning on any given weekend, Ferrari finds itself in the rare and genuinely enviable position of having two legitimate race winners under one roof, which is exactly the kind of problem most teams up and down the grid would trade almost anything to have. Thanks for watching this one all the way through, and I'll see you in the next video.